Hi folks, Seth Leapson here. Thanks for watching my monologue. In these uncertain times, you may be thinking about personal protection. If you are, I urge you to visit my friends at Guns Etc. They'll help you find the perfect protection for yourself and your family, and they can even teach you how to use it. They've been protecting Arizonans for over 33 years, and they stand for the great principles this country was founded upon. Or you can just click on gunsetcetera.com. And if you like my monologues, please subscribe to 960 The Patriots YouTube channel. Welcome back. January 8th, 2020. Something very dangerous is taking place in America right now. The truth is there have long been efforts to solidify the danger. It's just that up until about 10 years ago, or now, they weren't seen for what they should have been seen. Wrong. The danger. That words are inherently dangerous based on a political point of view. A various incarnation is that speech is violence. And thus there have been efforts to censor political speech for just about as long as the world has been in existence. From the beginning of this country, however, our founders rebuked this idea. They, like others of the Enlightenment, thought thoughts mattered, that brains mattered, and that reason and philosophy and discovery and the scientific method and that speech and debate was what formed human beings could handle. More should use to govern themselves and others. There would be absolutely 0 point to the First Amendment if any of this were not so. That was the point of the First Amendment, a tribute to the notion that adults could handle ideas, disagreement, choice, and thus govern themselves based on the sheet anchor of responsibility and freedom and equality, namely consent. I'm not speaking of direct invocations or commands of violence, of course, and I'm not talking of illegal verbal threats, but I am talking about the effort and attempt to take legitimate speech and treat it as illegal verbal threats and invocations of violence. We've seen this on our campuses for some time. When Heather MacDonald goes to a campus and violent riots break out to prevent her from speaking, or Ben Shapiro or Ann Coulter or Charles Murray or David Horowitz or any number of conservatives are invited to speak somewhere, the speech is violence theme arises, and true violence against them is ignored or justified. But disagreement over an idea is not violence. And if it were, our founders would not have given us a First Amendment, and we would not have 2 political parties in America. In fact, there would be no point to elections. Why let people decide for themselves how to govern themselves and others if only one point of view is to reign? Why not become a one-party state? I ask that rhetorically, knowing full well many do in fact want that. And those who give up on understanding the first rule of politics, that others may disagree with you, have engaged in all kinds of forms of censorship. It is, however, the stuff of tyranny, not freedom. It is the stuff of inequality, not equality, and it is undemocratic. So now, today, because the president gave a speech, the calls are to remove him from office. So now, today, because some people engaged in a riot, the calls are to punish and taint entire political parties, or a political party, with culpability. This has never been done before, and it augurs poorly for the United States. Meanwhile, true invocations of violence are ignored when they come from the right political party or perspective, namely, if they come from the left. Cops are pigs, all cops are bastards, as crispy as bacon, and worse. These themes, shouts, and calls were yelled and spray-painted when police officers were attacked physically last summer. Some of them forgot now, but just as important as the violence in Washington this past week. Some of them were even shot in the head. Plays and videos of assassinations of President Trump go unremarked upon, as do threats to bomb the White House if they come from famous singers and actors and actresses, imprecations to physically harass Trump administration officials from congresswomen, the same. And when violence from the left manifested in America, it is odd how silent those who are loud today were then. But one thing we have never done here is blame the actions of the extreme or disturbed on the normal and protected speech of the speaker. Bernie Sanders offers some terrible political ideas, but he could not be legitimately held responsible for a follower of his he did not know who engaged in awful violence. If he were, then all someone need do is claim Ted Cruz has awful political ideas, and thus he should be censored and silenced lest some follower of his someday act violently. It's called the heckler's veto, and we don't do it here. We don't or shouldn't shut down speech based on fears that those who disagree or agree too extremely will engage in violence. But that is precisely what is being attempted now. Bernie Sanders, free to roam. Ted Cruz, Josh Hawley, and Donald Trump to be censored or impeached or recalled. Of course, no society, even this one, is free of violent actors. Presidents here, after all, have been assassinated for their views, all by fellow Americans. But do we blame Abraham Lincoln for his own death? Or John Kennedy? Should they not have been anti-slavery or anti-communist? Do we blame Martin Luther King Jr. for his death? Should he not have been a civil rights protester? Do we blame Al Gore for the Unabomber or Bill Clinton for the Oklahoma bombing? To do so would be to silence every bit of political speech lest some extremist or insane person we do not know use those words to justify their violence. Perhaps it's a new version of safetyism. But it seems to me that is our problem just now, forgetting what extreme and insane really is. Regimes like the Soviet Union, Cambodia, China, those are the regimes that painted those who disagreed or disagree politically as insane, as abnormal, as having mental defects. But that is the abuse of psychiatry, as we have come to learn. I worry that we see it here now, and when mere proposals like Social Security reform are suggested, painting and describing those views as extreme as Democrats have done is an unhealthy thing, especially when they use that same word, extreme, to describe Islamic terrorism. But it was all in an effort to curb speech and marginalize political opponents and opposition. From one side, Antifa, an organization that carries physical weapons and disguises themselves in riot gear, they're responsible for a lot of violence. And yet they are excused as a myth by the chairman of the House Judiciary Committee and nothing more than an idea by President-elect Joe Biden. BLM riots burned cities, businesses, and bombed federal courthouses and took over police headquarters and had streets named after them and their names written into professional sports stadiums. On the other hand, again, Donald Trump, Josh Hawley, and Ted Cruz are responsible for violence because of their political speech. When Donald Trump fought with the press, used to wrapping itself in the protections of the First Amendment, said Trump was endangering them with his words. When Ted Cruz and Josh Hawley spoke this week of wanting an investigation into voter irregularities, they were blamed for the violence on Capitol Hill. We must be exquisitely careful about this trend. I think it nearly as dangerous as the aberrant violence itself. But while the violence is aberrant, the notion that speech is violence and can be and should be censored is becoming more and more respectable. It's almost as if the American Civil Liberties Union never existed, or the First Amendment. As someone on Twitter put it, the left sees our speech as violence and their violence as speech. Neither is right. There is a difference, and the difference matters if democracy and a Republican form of government are to have any chances of success. If you can't debate, you have tyranny. If you countenance, apologize for, or defend violence, you have anarchy, where might makes right, and not the other way around. We seem to have forgotten our Brandeis, Louis Brandeis, Supreme Court Justice. He wrote, quote, "Fear of serious injury cannot alone justify suppression of free speech and assembly. Men feared witches and burned women. It is the function of speech to free men from the bondage of irrational fears. To justify suppression of free speech, there must be reasonable ground to fear that serious evil will result if free speech is practiced. There must be reasonable ground to believe that the danger apprehended is imminent. There must be reasonable ground to believe that the evil to be prevented is serious." He continued, Those who won our independence by revolution were not cowards. They did not fear political change. They did not exalt order at the cost of liberty. To courageous, self-reliant men with confidence in the power of free and fearless reasoning applied through the process of popular government, no danger flowing from speech can be deemed clear and present unless the incidence of the evil apprehended is so imminent that it may befall before there is opportunity for full discussion. If there be time to expose through discussion the falsehoods and fallacies, to avert the evil by the process of education, the remedy to be applied is more speech, not enforced silence. Only an emergency justifies repression. Close quote. My worry today, too many are ready to declare emergencies to justify repression. That would be mob rule of its own kind, one-party rule, the criminalization of thought and politics. It's gone on for too long now on our campuses. I worry that it has now flowed up and out through too much of the rest of society as well. But that is not democracy, and would have stopped in their tracks every great movement in America if it were. It would have stopped abolition as much as civil rights. If Louis Brandeis doesn't persuade, let us try Oliver Wendell Holmes. Quote, every idea is an incitement. It offers itself for belief, and if believed, it is acted on unless some other belief outweighs it or some failure of energy stifles the movement at its birth. The only difference between the expression of an opinion and an incitement in the narrower sense is the speaker's enthusiasm for the result. For eloquence can always set fire to reason. Close quote. Yes, it may. But we don't stop eloquence for fear of that, lest we go to war against ideas and the expressions of them. Again, that's what I fear here, the criminalization of ideas, which will lead to the criminalization of their expressions of ideas, which will lead to the criminalization of the people who think them and speak them. And that is how Alexander Solzhenitsyn and Václav Havel ended up in prisons, along with millions of others, under the kinds of regimes they lived under. We don't do that here. We fought those regimes, and we didn't fight and prevail over them to ape and mimic them now. Or do we? I'm Seth Leibson. We'll be right back.